I stood on Brickell Avenue at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I had nowhere to go. My parents had just thrown me out of our family's penthouse in front of 60 of Miami's wealthiest people because I refused to marry a business partner's daughter I'd met exactly 3 times. My mother slapped me so hard my ear rang for 2 days. My father told me I wasn't his son anymore. My brother poured Dom Perignon on my Ferragamo loafers and called me nobody. Security from our own building escorted me to the lobby. My mother threw my passport off the 40th floor balcony and laughed while it spiraled down into the darkness. I'm 27. My name is Miles and I've been waiting for this moment for 3 years. Let me back up because this whole thing makes zero sense without context. My family owns a commercial real estate development operation in South Florida. My father, Peter, started it 32 years ago with money from his father, my grandfather, who died when I was 9. My mother, Marianne, comes from old Miami money, the kind where her family name opens doors my father's construction background never could. My younger brother, Miller, is 24 and has worked exactly 6 months in his entire life before deciding manual labor was beneath him. I'm the one who actually runs everything, not officially. On paper, my father is CEO, but I've been handling acquisitions, managing contractor relationships, negotiating with the city, and overseeing our property portfolio since I was 22. I finished my MBA at 24. I worked 16-hour days while Miller partied in Wynwood, and my parents attended charity galas. Every major deal we've closed in the last 5 years went through me first. Every permit we secured, every variance we got approved, every financing package we structured. My father likes to take credit at the country club. My mother likes to tell her friends about her successful sons, plural, even though Miller's only contribution is showing up to investor dinners and looking pretty in expensive suits my father buys him. The arranged marriage thing started 3 years ago. My father's biggest business partner has a daughter named Cassandra. She's 26, works in marketing for a luxury hotel chain. Perfectly nice from what I could tell during our 3 awkward dinners where both sets of parents watched us like we were performing seals. She wasn't interested in me either, which was the only thing we had in common. But our fathers had decided that combining their operations through marriage would create the biggest commercial development firm in South Florida. I said no the first time they brought it up. I was 24 and dating Violet, a medical resident I'd met through friends. My mother told me Violet wasn't the right kind of girl for our family. My father said I was thinking with the wrong head. Miller, always helpful, suggested I could marry Cassandra and keep Violet on the side like a proper Miami businessman. I ended things with Violet because my family made every dinner, every family gathering, every holiday unbearable. They'd bring up Cassandra constantly. They'd invite her family over without telling me. They'd schedule business dinners and surprise me with her presence. My mother would show me pictures of her at charity events. My father would mention how much the partnership would be worth. I broke up with Violet 3 years ago on a Wednesday afternoon in her apartment near Jackson Memorial Hospital. She cried. I couldn't tell her the real reason because it sounded insane. I just said we wanted different things. She deserved someone better than a coward who caved to family pressure. That was the day I stopped trying to be the son they wanted and started planning. Here's what my family never bothered to check. When I turned 25, my grandfather's trust fully vested to me. It was structured in a specific way that my father never paid attention to because he was busy building his empire and assumed the money was just sitting there gathering interest for my future. The trust owned 40% of the commercial development operation. My grandfather had insisted on it when my father started the business using his initial capital. On my 25th birthday, I became the majority shareholder by combining my trust stake with shares my father had casually transferred to me over the years for tax purposes. I own 53% of the company. My father owns 32%. My mother and Miller split the remaining 15% through various family trusts. I never mentioned this to anyone. I just kept working, kept managing, kept making them money. And I started making changes they didn't notice. I moved our accounts to banks where I had sole signing authority. I restructured our contractor agreements so payments required my approval. I registered our active development projects and holding companies where I controlled the boards. I built a fortress around our operations while they smiled for photographers at charity events. The Christmas Eve party was at our penthouse. 60 people, all the usual Miami society crowd my parents cultivate. Cassandra and her father were guests of honor. My father had planned to announce our engagement without asking me first. He'd actually had a ring delivered that afternoon, handed it to me in his study at 5 p.m. and told me I'd be proposing at midnight. I looked at the ring, looked at him, said no. He explained that this wasn't a request. This was how our family did business. This was my responsibility. This was what sons did for their fathers. Miller would never be capable of running the business. I was the talented one, the smart one. But I needed to learn that intelligence meant nothing without loyalty to family. I told him I'd already proven my loyalty by building his business for 5 years while Miller did nothing. He said that wasn't loyalty. That was just me doing what I was supposed to do. Real loyalty meant sacrifice. Real loyalty meant putting family legacy ahead of personal feelings. I went to the party, smiled, made small talk, watched Cassandra avoid eye contact with me because she knew something was planned and didn't want it either. Her father kept giving my father meaningful looks across the room. My mother kept touching the ring box in my pocket like she could transfer it to my finger through sheer willpower. At 11:30 p.m., my father clinked his glass for a toast. Started talking about family legacy, about building empires, about the next generation. Started talking about announcements and celebrations. My mother was beaming. Miller was smirking. Cassandra looked miserable. I stood up and said I had an announcement. Said I wouldn't be marrying anyone I didn't choose. Said I appreciated Cassandra and her family, but we both deserve better than a business transaction disguised as marriage. Said I was done being treated like an asset instead of a person. The penthouse went silent, 60 people staring. My father's face went red. My mother started laughing like I'd told a hilarious joke, then realized I wasn't joining in. My father said I was embarrassing him, embarrassing the family, embarrassing myself. He asked if I understood what I was throwing away. I said I understood perfectly. He said I was thinking like a child. I said I was thinking like someone who'd built his business for him while he took credit. That's when my mother slapped me full force across the face in front of everyone. Called me ungrateful, called me selfish, said I'd destroy this family's future for what? Love doesn't maintain their lifestyle. Love doesn't build legacies. My father said he had no son. Only a disappointment who thought he was better than his bloodline. Miller, always the golden child, poured his champagne on my shoes. Said, "Merry Christmas, nobody." People were starting to leave, uncomfortable with the family drama. My father told me to get out. My mother grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the door. When I pulled away, she went to her room and came back with my passport, walked to the balcony, and threw it over the edge. 40 floors down into the Miami night. She laughed while doing it. My father called building security. 2 guys I'd known for 3 years who I'd gotten Christmas bonuses for, who'd always been friendly. They looked uncomfortable but followed orders, escorted me to the elevator. I stood there watching my father's face as the doors closed. I smiled at him. Said, "Feliz Navidad, Papa." He looked confused like he couldn't understand why I wasn't begging or crying. The elevator doors closed. I walked through our lobby past our doorman who wouldn't look at me. Walked outside into humid Miami Christmas Eve air. Stood on the sidewalk in my ruined shoes with champagne still sticky on my feet. I took out my phone and made 3 calls. First, to my attorney, who I'd kept on retainer for 18 months specifically for this moment. Second, to our primary bank. Third, to our main contractor who'd been waiting for my signal. Then, I checked into the Four Seasons downtown using a credit card none of them knew existed. I spent Christmas Day in a hotel room making more calls. By December 26th, I'd frozen access to our primary operating accounts pending shareholder review. By December 27th, I'd notified our contractors that all active projects required new approval protocols. By December 28th, I'd filed paperwork with the state registering my controlling interest in our holding companies. My father started calling on December 29th, 17 calls that day. I didn't answer. My mother left voicemails that started angry and got increasingly desperate. Miller sent texts calling me every name he could think of. I blocked none of them. I wanted to see every message, every call, every moment they realized what was happening. Because here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't just walking away from the family. I was taking everything they'd built with me. Everything they thought was theirs was actually mine. And I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I broke up with Violet and decided I was done being their useful tool. Continues with the exact same structure through all updates to the final lines. I'm 27 years old. I own a $43 million business. I have no family to speak of. And I'm okay with that because the alternative was being their useful tool forever. This is better. Lonelier maybe, but better. To everyone who said I should forgive them and move on, I appreciate the advice, but that's not who I am. I'm the son who learned every lesson my father taught about business and applied them to the people who taught me. I'm the disappointment who thought he was better than his bloodline. And I was right. Feliz Navidad, Papa. The doors closed on your confused face 2 months ago, and they're staying closed. This version is narration ready. Same pauses implied in original phrasing, same emotional beats, same length and rhythm. If you want any minor cleanup, e.g., remove specific dates, shorten certain sentences slightly for delivery, or add pause markers, let me know. I'm the one who actually runs everything, not officially. On paper, my father is CEO, but I've been handling acquisitions, managing contractor relationships, negotiating with the city, and overseeing our property portfolio since I was 22. I finished my MBA at 24. I worked 16-hour days while Miller partied in Wynwood, and my parents attended charity galas. Every major deal we've closed in the last 5 years went through me first. Every permit we secured, every variance we got approved, every financing package we structured. My father likes to take credit at the country club. My mother likes to tell her friends about her successful sons, plural, even though Miller's only contribution is showing up to investor dinners and looking pretty in expensive suits my father buys him. The arranged marriage thing started 3 years ago. My father's biggest business partner has a daughter named Cassandra. She's 26, works in marketing for a luxury hotel chain. Perfectly nice from what I could tell during our 3 awkward dinners where both sets of parents watched us like we were performing seals. She wasn't interested in me either, which was the only thing we had in common. But our fathers had decided that combining their operations through marriage would create the biggest commercial development firm in South Florida. I said no the first time they brought it up. I was 24 and dating Violet, a medical resident I'd met through friends. My mother told me Violet wasn't the right kind of girl for our family. My father said I was thinking with the wrong head. Miller, always helpful, suggested I could marry Cassandra and keep Violet on the side like a proper Miami businessman. I ended things with Violet because my family made every dinner, every family gathering, every holiday unbearable. They'd bring up Cassandra constantly. They'd invite her family over without telling me. They'd schedule business dinners and surprise me with her presence. My mother would show me pictures of her at charity events. My father would mention how much the partnership would be worth. I broke up with Violet 3 years ago on a Wednesday afternoon in her apartment near Jackson Memorial Hospital. She cried. I couldn't tell her the real reason because it sounded insane. I just said we wanted different things. She deserved someone better than a coward who caved to family pressure. That was the day I stopped trying to be the son they wanted and started planning. Here's what my family never bothered to check. When I turned 25, my grandfather's trust fully vested to me. It was structured in a specific way that my father never paid attention to because he was busy building his empire and assumed the money was just sitting there gathering interest for my future. The trust owned 40% of the commercial development operation. My grandfather had insisted on it when my father started the business using his initial capital. On my 25th birthday, I became the majority shareholder by combining my trust stake with shares my father had casually transferred to me over the years for tax purposes. I own 53% of the company. My father owns 32%. My mother and Miller split the remaining 15% through various family trusts. I never mentioned this to anyone. I just kept working, kept managing, kept making them money. And I started making changes they didn't notice. I moved our accounts to banks where I had sole signing authority. I restructured our contractor agreements so payments required my approval. I registered our active development projects and holding companies where I controlled the boards. I built a fortress around our operations while they smiled for photographers at charity events. The Christmas Eve party was at our penthouse. 60 people, all the usual Miami society crowd my parents cultivate. Cassandra and her father were guests of honor. My father had planned to announce our engagement without asking me first. He'd actually had a ring delivered that afternoon, handed it to me in his study at 5 p.m. and told me I'd be proposing at midnight. I looked at the ring, looked at him, said no. He explained that this wasn't a request. This was how our family did business. This was my responsibility. This was what sons did for their fathers. Miller would never be capable of running the business. I was the talented one, the smart one. But I needed to learn that intelligence meant nothing without loyalty to family. I told him I'd already proven my loyalty by building his business for 5 years while Miller did nothing. He said that wasn't loyalty. That was just me doing what I was supposed to do. Real loyalty meant sacrifice. Real loyalty meant putting family legacy ahead of personal feelings. I went to the party, smiled, made small talk, watched Cassandra avoid eye contact with me because she knew something was planned and didn't want it either. Her father kept giving my father meaningful looks across the room. My mother kept touching the ring box in my pocket like she could transfer it to my finger through sheer willpower. At 11:30 p.m., my father clinked his glass for a toast. Started talking about family legacy, about building empires, about the next generation. Started talking about announcements and celebrations. My mother was beaming. Miller was smirking. Cassandra looked miserable. I stood up and said I had an announcement. Said I wouldn't be marrying anyone I didn't choose. Said I appreciated Cassandra and her family, but we both deserve better than a business transaction disguised as marriage. Said I was done being treated like an asset instead of a person. The penthouse went silent, 60 people staring. My father's face went red. My mother started laughing like I'd told a hilarious joke, then realized I wasn't joining in. My father said I was embarrassing him, embarrassing the family, embarrassing myself. He asked if I understood what I was throwing away. I said I understood perfectly. He said I was thinking like a child. I said I was thinking like someone who'd built his business for him while he took credit. That's when my mother slapped me full force across the face in front of everyone. Called me ungrateful, called me selfish, said I'd destroy this family's future for what? Love doesn't pay for penthouses. Love doesn't maintain their lifestyle. Love doesn't build legacies. My father said he had no son. Only a disappointment who thought he was better than his bloodline. Miller, always the golden child, poured his champagne on my shoes. Said, "Merry Christmas, nobody." People were starting to leave, uncomfortable with the family drama. My father told me to get out. My mother grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the door. When I pulled away, she went to her room and came back with my passport, walked to the balcony, and threw it over the edge. 40 floors down into the Miami night. She laughed while doing it. My father called building security. 2 guys I'd known for 3 years who I'd gotten Christmas bonuses for, who'd always been friendly. They looked uncomfortable but followed orders, escorted me to the elevator. I stood there watching my father's face as the doors closed. I smiled at him. Said, "Feliz Navidad, Papa." He looked confused like he couldn't understand why I wasn't begging or crying. The elevator doors closed. I walked through our lobby past our doorman who wouldn't look at me. Walked outside into humid Miami Christmas Eve air. Stood on the sidewalk in my ruined shoes with champagne still sticky on my feet. I took out my phone and made 3 calls. First, to my attorney, who I'd kept on retainer for 18 months specifically for this moment. Second, to our primary bank. Third, to our main contractor who'd been waiting for my signal. Then, I checked into the Four Seasons downtown using a credit card none of them knew existed. I spent Christmas Day in a hotel room making more calls. By December 26th, I'd frozen access to our primary operating accounts pending shareholder review. By December 27th, I'd notified our contractors that all active projects required new approval protocols. By December 28th, I'd filed paperwork with the state registering my controlling interest in our holding companies. My father started calling on December 29th, 17 calls that day. I didn't answer. My mother left voicemails that started angry and got increasingly desperate. Miller sent texts calling me every name he could think of. I blocked none of them. I wanted to see every message, every call, every moment they realized what was happening. Because here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't just walking away from the family. I was taking everything they'd built with me. Everything they thought was theirs was actually mine. And I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I broke up with Violet and decided I was done being their useful tool. New Year's Eve, I was still at the Four Seasons. My attorney confirmed everything was locked down. Our business was functionally frozen. No money moving, no projects proceeding, no access to accounts. My father would be figuring this out right about now. Would be calling his own attorney, would be discovering that his son, the disappointment, the one who thought he was better than his bloodline actually was. I haven't responded to any of them yet. It's been 7 days since Christmas. 7 days since they threw me out of the penthouse. And I'm just getting started. My phone is up to 43 missed calls now. My father, my mother, Miller, even Cassandra's father, which is interesting because what does he think I can do for him now? The voicemails are getting longer, more desperate. My mother actually crying in one of them, talking about family and forgiveness and how they can work this out. But here's the thing they don't understand. This isn't about working things out. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about showing them exactly what happens when you treat someone like a business asset for 27 years and then throw them away the moment they assert any independence. I'm not going back. I'm not answering calls. And I'm definitely not unfreezing those accounts until they understand what they've lost. How long should I wait before I respond? Part of me wants to watch them spiral for weeks. Part of me wants to see how desperate they get. And part of me, the part that's still angry about standing on Brickell Avenue on Christmas Eve with champagne on my shoes, wants to never respond at all. Update 1. So, the comments on my last post were split between people saying I'm a genius and people saying I should just talk to my family like an adult. To the second group, I appreciate the sentiment, but you're assuming my family operates like normal people. They don't. Let me tell you what's happened since I posted 2 weeks ago. The calls didn't stop. They increased. By January 5th, I had 89 missed calls. My father left a voicemail that lasted 6 minutes where he explained very carefully that I was making a serious mistake, that I didn't understand business the way he did, that I was too emotional to see the bigger picture. He said I was acting like a child throwing a tantrum, and when I was ready to discuss things rationally, he'd be willing to meet with me, not apologize, not acknowledge what happened at Christmas, just willing to meet like he was doing me a favor. My mother's voicemails were different. She cried in most of them, talked about how much she loved me, how family is supposed to work through disagreements, how I was breaking her heart. She said she understood I was upset about the engagement situation, that maybe they'd pushed too hard, but completely freezing them out of the business was cruel and vindictive. She kept saying vindictive like it was the worst possible thing I could be. Never once mentioned slapping me or throwing my passport off the balcony or laughing while security dragged me out, just that I was being vindictive. Miller sent texts, not voicemails, just texts, calling me every variation of selfish and stupid he could think of. Said I was tanking the family business out of spite. Said I was sabotaging our future because I couldn't handle being told what to do. Said I was pathetic for holding a grudge over one bad night. One bad night. Like that's all it was. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. I was watching something more interesting develop. Our business has 6 major ongoing projects, 2 residential towers in Fort Lauderdale, a mixed-use development in Coral Gables, an office complex in Doral, and 2 retail centers in Boca Raton. These projects have investors, contractors, timelines, permits that expire, financing that requires monthly draws. All of it was frozen because I controlled the accounts and the holding companies. By January 8th, our main contractor called me directly. His name is Peter, same as my father, which always made meetings confusing. He'd been working with our family for 8 years. He wanted to know what was happening because his crews were sitting idle on 3 job sites and he had payroll to make. I told him the business was going through a restructuring and I'd have clarity for him within 2 weeks. He asked if this had anything to do with Christmas Eve because apparently the Miami construction community is smaller than I thought and word travels fast. I said it had everything to do with Christmas Eve. He said he respected what I was doing, but his workers needed their paychecks. I told him I'd make sure his people got paid directly from project accounts I controlled separately. He thanked me and asked if my father knew that. I said my father was about to find out a lot of things. January 10th, Cassandra's father showed up at the Four Seasons. I don't know how he found out where I was staying. Probably called every hotel in downtown Miami until someone confirmed a Miles with our last name was registered. He met me in the lobby bar at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Looked uncomfortable, which was interesting because this man has negotiated 100 million deals and never looks uncomfortable. He sat down and ordered a whiskey even though it was early afternoon. He told me he understood I was upset, that the engagement announcement was mishandled, that both our fathers had overstepped. Then he said his daughter was humiliated. Cassandra had left Miami entirely, went to stay with her sister in Atlanta because people were talking about what happened at the Christmas party. She was getting messages from friends asking what went wrong, if she'd been rejected, if there was something wrong with her. He said she didn't deserve that kind of embarrassment. I agreed with him. I told him Cassandra didn't deserve any of this. Neither did I. We were both treated like business assets instead of people. The problem was with our fathers, not with us. He looked relieved for a moment, like maybe I was going to be reasonable. Then I told him that's exactly why I wasn't unfreezing anything until my father understood what he'd actually done. Cassandra's father shifted tactics, asked me what I wanted. What would it take to resolve this? I said I wanted my family to understand they don't own me. He said that was reasonable, but was I willing to destroy a business partnership that had been profitable for both families just to make that point? I said yes, absolutely, if that's what it took. He finished his whiskey, told me I was more like my father than I realized. That stung more than it should have. He left. 3 hours later, my father called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I was curious what he'd say now that Cassandra's father had reported back. My father told me we needed to meet face to face. That this had gone on long enough that I'd made my point and now it was time to be an adult and discuss solutions. I asked him what point he thought I'd made. He said I'd shown them I had more control than they'd realized, that I was capable of taking drastic action, that I was willing to damage the business to get attention. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. He actually thought this was about getting his attention, about proving I had power. He didn't understand at all. I told him this wasn't about proving anything. This was about consequences. He'd thrown me out of the family, so I was taking the family business with me. Simple cause and effect. He said I was being dramatic. Said one argument at a party didn't mean I wasn't part of the family anymore. I reminded him he specifically said he had no son, only a disappointment. He said that was heat of the moment, that I'd embarrassed him in front of 60 people and he'd reacted badly. Never said he was sorry, just that he'd reacted badly. I asked him if he understood who actually owned the business. He said, of course he did. He'd built it. I said, no, I meant legally, who owned the majority share. There was a long pause. He told me we could discuss ownership structures when we met in person. I said we were discussing it right now. He said the trust my grandfather set up was meant to be managed jointly, that just because my name was on the paperwork didn't mean I could unilaterally make decisions. I told him that's exactly what it meant, that he should probably talk to an attorney about how trusts and corporate ownership actually work. He said I was making a huge mistake, that I didn't understand the full picture, that there were obligations and relationships I was jeopardizing. I asked which relationships he was worried about, the business partners he tried to sell me to like a racehorse, the society friends who watched him humiliate his son. He said I was twisting everything, that the engagement was supposed to be good for me too. That I would have benefited from the partnership. I said I didn't want benefits that came with a wife I didn't choose. He said that's not how their generation did things. His marriage to my mother was partially arranged and they'd made it work. I said that explained a lot about their relationship. Actually, he got angry then told me I was ungrateful that everything I had came from him. I reminded him everything he had came from his father. and his father had made sure I'd have control when the time came. Maybe my grandfather had understood something about my father that took me 27 years to figure out. My father said my grandfather would be ashamed of what I was doing to the family. I said my grandfather specifically structured his trust to prevent my father from having total control. So maybe my grandfather knew exactly what kind of man his son was. My father hung up. That was January 10th, January 12th, my mother tried a different approach. She showed up at the Four Seasons with my Aunt Violet. Not the ex-girlfriend Violet, my mother's sister Violet, who I've always liked. My aunt is the only reasonable person in my mother's family. She teaches history at FIU and has always been the black sheep for choosing academia over society life. They found me working in the business center. My mother hugged me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't slapped me in front of 60 people. My aunt looked uncomfortable, but hugged me too. They sat down and my mother started talking about how much she'd missed me, how empty the penthouse felt without me, how this had all gotten so out of hand. She said she'd been thinking about what happened at Christmas and she understood now that they'd pressured me unfairly about Cassandra, that she and my father should have respected my feelings more. I waited for the but. It came about 30 seconds later, but I had to understand their perspective too. They'd built this life for me and Miller. Everything they'd done was to secure our futures. The engagement wasn't about treating me like property. It was about opportunity. Cassandra came from a good family, had a successful career, would have been a strong partner in both business and life. My mother said she just wanted to see me settled with someone appropriate before she got too old to enjoy grandchildren. My Aunt Violet cut in said that maybe the way they'd handled it was wrong regardless of their intentions. That I had a right to choose my own wife. My mother agreed quickly. Said, "Of course I did. They just hoped I'd see the wisdom in their suggestion." Never mind that their suggestion came with my father handing me an engagement ring and telling me to propose at midnight. I asked my mother if she remembered slapping me. She looked startled, said she'd been upset, that I'd humiliated her in front of all their friends, that she'd reacted emotionally. I asked if she remembered throwing my passport off the balcony. She said she'd been angry and had done something impulsive that she regretted. I asked if she remembered laughing while she did it. She said I was remembering wrong, that she definitely hadn't been laughing, that I was letting my hurt feelings distort what actually happened. That's when I knew this conversation was pointless. She was rewriting history right in front of me. My aunt looked uncomfortable. She knew what my mother was doing, even if she didn't want to call it out. I told my mother I'd think about meeting with them. She brightened up immediately, started talking about family dinners, about how we could work everything out, about how the business needed to start operating normally again. I said I'd think about it, not that I'd do it. She heard what she wanted to hear. She hugged me again and told me she loved me. My aunt hugged me and whispered that I should call her separately. They left. My aunt texted me that night, said my mother and father were panicking more than they were letting on. That several investors had been calling asking questions about project delays. That my father had apparently borrowed against some personal assets to cover monthly expenses for the penthouse and lifestyle costs, expecting to pay it back from the business accounts I'd frozen, that he was about 3 weeks away from having serious cash flow problems, that my mother was talking about selling jewelry. I texted back asking why she was telling me this. She said because I deserved to know what was happening and because she thought I should understand the full impact of what I was doing before I decided how far to take it. I asked if she thought I should back down. She said no. She thought my parents had treated me badly and needed to face consequences. But she wanted me to go into this with my eyes open. That my father's pride might literally ruin him before he admitted he was wrong. January 15th, Miller showed up, not at the Four Seasons, but at a Starbucks in Brickell where I'd gone to work on my laptop. I don't know if he'd been following me or if it was coincidence. He sat down across from me without asking. Looked angry. Told me I needed to stop playing games and fix the business situation. I asked him what business situation he was referring to. He said I knew exactly what he meant, that I was freezing everyone out because I was having a temper tantrum. I closed my laptop and looked at him, asked him what he'd contributed to the business in the last 3 years. He said that wasn't the point. I said it was exactly the point. He'd done nothing except show up to dinners and spend money. I'd built everything while he partied. Now he was upset that the person who actually built it was taking it away. He said it wasn't mine to take. It was family property. I reminded him I owned 53%. He said that was a technicality. I said ownership is literally never a technicality. He called me bitter. Said I'd always been jealous of him because he knew how to enjoy life while I worked myself to death trying to impress our father. That hit closer than I wanted to admit. But I told him I wasn't jealous of someone who was about to be 25 with no skills, no business, and no trust fund. He asked what I meant by that. I said our father had been paying his lifestyle from business accounts I now controlled. He went pale. Miller said I couldn't do that. Couldn't cut him off. He had bills. Rent on his place in Wynwood. A car payment on his Range Rover. Credit cards he'd maxed out, assuming there would always be money to pay them. I told him maybe he should get a job like normal people. He called me a spiteful word. Said I was going to destroy the family because I couldn't get over being told what to do one time. I said it wasn't one time. It was every time. Every decision, every relationship, every choice I'd ever tried to make for myself. And he'd stood by and benefited from it while contributing nothing. He left, didn't buy coffee, just walked out. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Cassandra. She said her father had told her I'd refused to unfreeze the business, that I was apparently burning everything down because of what happened at Christmas. She said she wanted me to know she understood why I was angry, that she'd felt like property, too, during the whole engagement situation. Then she said she hoped I knew what I was doing because a lot of people's jobs depended on those projects moving forward. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? January 17th, my attorney called, said my father's attorneys had sent a letter demanding I release control of the business accounts immediately or face a shareholder dispute lawsuit. I asked if they had grounds. He said not really, but they could tie things up in court for months and make everything expensive and public. I told him to send a response stating I was exercising my rights as majority shareholder to conduct a comprehensive audit of all business operations before releasing any funds. That would buy me time and make my father look suspicious if he fought it too hard. The attorney asked me what my endgame was, what I actually wanted from this. I said I wanted them to understand they'd lost me the moment they threw me out of that penthouse. That there was no coming back from that. He said that was fine emotionally, but I needed to think practically. Did I want to run the business myself, sell my shares, dissolve everything? I told him I hadn't decided yet. He said I should decide soon because the longer this dragged out, the more damage I did to asset values I partially owned. It's been 23 days since Christmas Eve, 3 weeks and 2 days. The missed calls are up to 147. My father left another voicemail yesterday saying he was willing to sit down with lawyers present and work out a formal arrangement where I had more official authority in the business if that's what I needed. Still not an apology, just an offer to give me what was already mine in exchange for me giving him back control. I haven't decided how to respond. Part of me wants to watch them spiral further. Part of me knows my aunt is right, that my father's pride will literally ruin him before he admits he was wrong. And part of me is starting to realize that destroying the business destroys my own assets, too. But mostly, I keep thinking about standing on Brickell Avenue with champagne on my shoes while my mother laughed from 40 floors up. And I don't feel like being reasonable yet. How much further should I push this? The comments on the last post were helpful, but I could use more perspective on whether I'm being strategic or just vindictive. My aunt says I can be both. Maybe she's right. Update 2. Okay, so to everyone who said this would get complicated, you were absolutely right. It's been 47 days since Christmas Eve, and the situation has evolved in ways I didn't fully anticipate. Some good, some exactly what I wanted, and some that are making me question whether I've thought this through completely. First, the business situation has gotten nuclear. 3 of our major investors demanded a meeting with me on January 22nd. Not with my father, with me. They'd done their homework and figured out I controlled everything. We met at a conference room one of them rented at a WeWork in Brickell. These are serious people with serious money in our projects. One of them has $40 million invested in the Fort Lauderdale residential towers. They sat me down and explained their position very clearly. They didn't care about my family drama. They cared about their returns. Projects were frozen, contractors were idle, permits were expiring, and they were bleeding money on financing costs. One of them said if I didn't unfreeze operations within 2 weeks, they'd file a lawsuit against both me and my father for breach of fiduciary duty. Another one said his attorney had looked at our corporate structure and believed there were grounds to force a sale of the company to recover investor funds. I told them I understood their frustration, but I was conducting an audit of all business operations before releasing funds. The investor with $40 million in asked me to cut the corporate speak and tell him what I actually wanted. So I did. I said my father had treated me like an employee instead of a partner for 5 years while taking credit for my work. Then he tried to force me into an arranged marriage and threw me out of the family when I refused. Now I wanted him to understand what the business looked like without me. One of them, a guy in his 60s who'd worked with my father for a decade, said he respected that, but I was hurting myself as much as my father. That the longer projects stayed frozen, the more value we all lost. I asked him if he'd invest in a business where the supposed CEO couldn't actually access any accounts or make any operational decisions. He said, probably not. I told him that's exactly the point I was making to my father. They left. The next day, 2 of them pulled their financing from projects that hadn't broken ground yet, just completely withdrew. That's $32 million gone. My attorney called me in a panic, saying this would trigger cross-default clauses and other agreements and potentially collapse multiple projects. I told him I understood. He asked if I understood that I just cost myself approximately $8 million in lost equity value. I said, yes, I understood that too. My father called me from yet another new number. He was past angry. He told me I'd just destroyed 2 years of work in one morning, that I'd proven I had power and control. Congratulations. But now I was burning down everything, including my own future. I asked him if he was ready to apologize for Christmas Eve. He said we were past apologies. We were at the point where I either released the business accounts immediately or he'd file for an emergency injunction to remove me as a controlling shareholder based on my clearly irrational behavior. I told him, good luck with that. My attorney had already researched that angle, and the threshold for proving a majority shareholder is acting irrationally is extremely high, especially when the shareholder in question has an MBA and has been successfully running operations for 5 years. My father said I was being pedantic. I said I was being precise. He hung up. January 25th, something unexpected happened. My mother's friends started dropping her. Not all of them, but enough that she noticed. I found out because my Aunt Violet called me and said my mother had shown up at her house crying. Apparently, 2 charity boards had asked my mother to step down from her positions. One of them cited concerns about the family's business stability. The other one just said they were making changes to their board composition. But the real issue was social events. My mother had been uninvited from 3 events she'd been planning to attend. The Art Basel Committee asked her to remove herself from the planning group for next year. A friend she'd known for 15 years told her over lunch that maybe they should take a break from their weekly tennis games until things settled down with the family situation. My aunt said my mother was devastated, that her entire life was built around her social circle and her reputation in Miami society. That being frozen out was destroying her in a way I might not understand. I asked my aunt if my mother had apologized for slapping me yet. My aunt said no, but maybe I should be the bigger person and reach out anyway. I said being the bigger person was what got me thrown out of the Penthouse in the first place. But I'll admit, hearing about my mother's social circle collapsing hit differently than I expected. I'd been focused on the business and my father's control issues. I hadn't really thought about how this would affect my mother's entire world. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt like maybe I was taking this too far. Most of me was still angry enough that I didn't care. January 28th, Miller's situation got worse. He showed up at the Four Seasons again, except this time he looked rough. He'd been drinking. I could smell it on him. He sat down in the lobby and told me his landlord was evicting him. His Range Rover had been repossessed. He had $17,000 in credit card debt and the banks were threatening to sue him. His girlfriend of 8 months had left him when she realized the money wasn't actually his. I asked him what he wanted me to do about it. He said I could release enough money for him to get back on his feet. Just a small amount, 50,000 or something. He'd pay me back when things normalized. I asked him when he thought things would normalize. He said when I stopped being so stubborn and worked things out with our father. I told him things would never normalize in the way he was imagining. Miller said I'd won already, that I'd proven my point, that everyone understood I had the power. Now I was just being cruel for the sake of it. I asked him if he remembered pouring champagne on my shoes and calling me nobody. He said that was different. That was just him being drunk and stupid at a party. I said, no, that was him showing me exactly how much respect he had for me. How much the entire family had for me. Miller said I was holding a grudge over something minor while destroying real lives over it. I told him his lifestyle wasn't a real life. It was my work subsidizing his party years. He could get an actual job like people who didn't have trust funds. He asked what kind of job someone with 6 months of experience and a reputation as the son from a family in the middle of a public meltdown was supposed to get. I suggested retail. He left. February 1st. I finally went back to the Penthouse. I needed to get some of my belongings I'd left behind. Documents, some clothes, my college diploma that was still framed on my old bedroom wall for some reason. I texted my father that I'd be coming by at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when I knew he'd be trying to meet with attorneys about the business situation. I used my key. They hadn't changed the locks, which surprised me. The Penthouse felt different, smaller somehow. I went to my old room and started packing things into a duffel bag. My mother came home while I was there. She looked startled to see me. Asked what I was doing. I told her I was collecting my things. She said, of course, but couldn't we talk? She sat on my old bed and started crying. Real crying. Not the performative kind from her voicemails. She said she missed me. That the Penthouse felt empty without me. That she'd made mistakes on Christmas Eve. But she'd been under so much pressure with the party and trying to maintain appearances. She said she never should have slapped me, that she'd been horrified by her own behavior the moment it happened. I asked her why she didn't say that 6 weeks ago. She said she'd been too proud. Then she told me what was really happening. My father had taken out a loan against the Penthouse itself to cover their monthly expenses. The Penthouse I'd grown up in. They owed $400,000 with a balloon payment due in March. They'd been planning to pay it from the business accounts I'd frozen. Now they were about to default. The bank would foreclose on a property worth $8 million over $400,000 because my father's pride wouldn't let him admit he was wrong. My mother said she understood I was angry, that I had every right to be. But was I really willing to let them lose everything over one night? I reminded her it wasn't one night. It was 27 years of being treated like a tool instead of a son. She said that wasn't fair, that they'd given me everything. I said they'd given me everything except the ability to make my own choices. She asked what I wanted. What would make this right? I told her I wanted my father to admit he was wrong. To acknowledge that trying to force an arranged marriage was unacceptable. To apologize for throwing me out of the family. To understand that I'm a person, not a business asset. She said he'd never say those things. His pride wouldn't allow it. I said then I guess we're at an impasse. My mother got angry then said I was being just as stubborn as my father. That I was willing to destroy the family's entire legacy because I couldn't be flexible. That my grandfather would be ashamed of me using his trust to hurt my own family. I asked her if she thought my grandfather would be proud of them trying to sell me into a marriage I didn't want. She didn't answer. I finished packing and walked toward the door. My mother followed me, still talking, saying we could work this out if I'd just be reasonable. That family is supposed to forgive each other. That holding on to anger like this would only hurt me in the end. I told her I'd spent 3 years holding on to anger and it had served me pretty well so far. She said that was a horrible way to live. I said it was better than living as someone else's puppet. I left, got in the elevator, stood there remembering the last time I'd been in this elevator, watching my father's confused face as I smiled and said, Feliz Navidad. This time, my mother's face was the one looking confused. February 3rd, Cassandra's father made a move I didn't see coming. He filed paperwork to dissolve the business partnership between his operation and ours. Just completely severed the relationship. That meant projects we had joint ventures on would need to be restructured. It meant financing would need to be renegotiated. It meant the arrangement our fathers had built over 10 years was over. My attorney said this was actually good for me in some ways. It simplified the corporate structure and removed one of the parties who might have standing to sue me. But it also meant I'd just cost my father his biggest business relationship, the one he'd been willing to sacrifice my happiness to preserve. And now it was gone anyway. My father left a voicemail that was different from all the others. He said Cassandra's father had called him to explain that he couldn't continue in business with our family given the current instability. That this partnership had been worth tens of millions in potential projects. That I'd now cost him not just current deals but future opportunities. That he hoped I was happy with myself. But here's what got me. At the end of the voicemail, my father said he'd been thinking about Christmas Eve. That maybe he'd been too harsh. That maybe he should have listened to me more before making plans. Not an apology exactly, but closer than he'd gotten in 47 days. Then he said if I released the business accounts and we could start operating normally again, he'd be willing to discuss giving me more formal authority. Willing to acknowledge publicly that I was essential to the business. Still not what I wanted to hear. Still not an actual apology. Still framing it as him doing me a favor by acknowledging what was already true. But it was movement. My attorney said I should take it. That I'd made my point and now it was time to negotiate a resolution that didn't destroy asset values for everyone. But then February 5th happened. I got a call from my contractor friend Peter. He said he needed to talk to me about something sensitive. We met at a restaurant in Coral Gables. He told me my father had approached him about continuing work on projects without my approval. Had offered to personally guarantee payments somehow. Was basically trying to go around me by promising contractors he'd find ways to pay them if they just kept working. Peter said he'd told my father no, that he respected what I was doing and wouldn't undermine it, but he wanted me to know my father was getting desperate enough to make promises he probably couldn't keep, that other contractors might not be as loyal to me, that the situation was getting messy in ways that could end up with people getting hurt financially. I thanked him for telling me, asked him if he thought I should back down. He said that wasn't his call to make, but he asked me if I'd thought about what winning looked like because from where he sat, I'd already won. My family understood I had the power. The question was whether I wanted to rule over rubble or actually build something. It's been 47 days. The missed calls are up to 236. My father's voicemails are getting more conciliatory, but still not apologetic. My mother is losing her social world. Miller is about to be homeless. The business is hemorrhaging value. Investors are suing. Partners are walking away. And I'm sitting in a hotel room wondering if I'm being strategic or if I'm just burning everything down because I'm too angry to stop. Some of you said I should take the win and move on. Some said I should push until they actually apologize. I don't know anymore. My aunt keeps calling asking me to please just meet with them. My attorney keeps warning me about declining asset values. And I keep thinking about my mother throwing my passport off the balcony and laughing. How do you know when enough is enough? Because I genuinely don't know if I'm done yet. Final update. It's March 2nd, 9 weeks since they threw me out. The missed calls hit 289 yesterday, but the calls changed in the last week. They're not angry anymore. They are not trying to negotiate. They're begging. February 15th was when everything accelerated. The bank sent foreclosure notices on the Penthouse. My father had missed 2 payments on that loan he'd taken out. $400,000 he'd borrowed, expecting to pay it back easily once I released the business accounts. Except I never released them. And now the bank wanted their money. My mother called me 17 times that day. Left voicemails that were just her crying, saying please, saying they'd lose everything, saying I had to help them. Not because she was sorry, not because they'd treated me badly, just because they were about to lose the Penthouse and she couldn't imagine living anywhere else. I didn't call back. I was busy with something more important. I'd been meeting with 3 different investment groups about buying out my father's remaining stake in the business. All of them were interested. One of them made an offer that was actually fair given the current chaos. 32 cents on the dollar for his shares. He'd walk away with about $8 million. Not nothing, but a fraction of what those shares would have been worth if he hadn't tried to force me into an arranged marriage. February 18th, my attorney finalized the restructuring plan. We'd been working on it for 3 weeks. Here's what it looked like. I would maintain my 53% controlling stake. I would sell off 2 of the troubled projects at a loss to satisfy the investors who were suing. I would bring in new capital from a group I'd been cultivating through my own contacts, not my father's. The business would continue operating, but under a completely new structure where my father had zero operational authority. The alternative was my father could refuse to cooperate and watch everything collapse in litigation while the bank foreclosed on his house and his lifestyle evaporated. My attorney said it was harsh but legal. I said it was proportional. February 20th, I finally agreed to meet with my father. Not at the Penthouse, not at his choice of location, at my attorney's office in downtown Miami at 10 a.m. on a Thursday. My father showed up with his own attorney. He looked older than I remembered, thinner. He'd always been the kind of man who wore confidence like cologne, but now he just looked tired. We sat across from each other at a conference table. His attorney started talking about finding a reasonable compromise that would allow the business to operate while respecting everyone's interests. My attorney cut him off and slid my restructuring proposal across the table. My father read it. His attorney read it. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then my father looked at me and asked if I was seriously trying to force him out of the business he'd built. I reminded him he didn't build it. His father did with money that came with strings attached. Strings he'd ignored for 30 years. He said that was semantics. I said it was ownership law. He asked what I wanted from him. What would make me stop this? I told him I wanted him to say he was wrong, that Christmas Eve was wrong, that trying to force an arranged marriage was wrong, that throwing me out of the family was wrong, that treating me like a business asset for 27 years was wrong. My father said he couldn't say those things because he didn't believe them. He'd done what he thought was best for the family. The marriage would have been good for me whether I could see it or not. He'd built everything to provide for us, and I was destroying it out of spite. I asked his attorney to leave the room, my attorney too. When it was just us, I told my father the truth. That I'd been planning this since the day I broke up with Violet 3 years ago. That every choice I'd made since then was designed to put me in position to take everything when the moment came. That Christmas Eve wasn't a surprise. It was exactly what I'd been waiting for, an excuse to execute plans I'd already prepared. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Asked when I'd become so cold. I told him I learned from him. He built a business by being ruthless and calculating. I just applied those same principles to family relationships. He said that was different. Business was business, but family was supposed to mean something. I said then maybe he shouldn't have treated me like a business transaction. He asked what happened to the son who used to look up to him, who used to want his approval. I told him that son died 3 years ago when he realized his father would never approve of anything except total obedience. He asked if I really wanted to destroy everything he'd built. I said I wanted to take what was mine and build something better without him. My father signed the restructuring papers that day. His attorney advised against it, but he signed anyway. He didn't have much choice. The alternative was losing everything in foreclosure and litigation. At least this way, he'd walk away with $8 million and whatever was left of his reputation. February 24th, I dealt with Miller. He'd been staying with friends since his eviction, bouncing between couches and getting increasingly desperate. He showed up at my attorney's office unannounced. Security called me and I told them to let him up. Miller sat across from me and begged. Actually begged. Said he was sorry for Christmas Eve. Sorry for pouring champagne on my shoes. Sorry for calling me nobody. Sorry for never appreciating the work I did. He said he'd been stupid and spoiled. And he understood that now. He said if I'd just help him get back on his feet, he'd prove he could be better. I asked him what better looked like. He said he'd get a real job. He'd stop partying. He'd actually contribute something. I told him I'd believe that when I saw it, but I wasn't funding his redemption arc. He asked what he was supposed to do. He had no money, no job, no references that didn't involve our family name, which was currently toxic in Miami. I told him the same thing I told him at Starbucks. Get a regular job like people without trust funds. He said I was sentencing him to poverty. I said I was refusing to subsidize his lifestyle anymore. There's a difference. He said our grandfather would be disappointed in me for abandoning family. I said our grandfather specifically structured his trust to prevent our father from having total control. Maybe he knew exactly what kind of family we were. Miller left. I haven't heard from him since. My Aunt Violet told me he moved to Tampa to stay with a friend from college and got a job managing a gym. She said he seems humbled. So good. February 28th, my mother requested a meeting. Just her. No attorneys, no my father. We met at a restaurant in Coconut Grove. She looked different, wearing less jewelry, hair not as perfectly styled. The veneer of Miami society perfection had cracked. She told me the bank had agreed to a payment plan that would let them keep the penthouse if they could make a $50,000 payment by March 15th and then regular payments going forward. She said my father's payout from the business restructuring would cover it, but he was refusing to use that money for the penthouse. He wanted to invest it in starting something new. She said they were fighting constantly about it. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said because she wanted me to understand the consequences of what I'd done. Their marriage was falling apart. She'd lost her social circle. Miller was in Tampa working at a gym. The family was destroyed. And for what? Because I couldn't accept one arranged marriage. I told her it was never about one arranged marriage. It was about 27 years of being treated like property. She said, every parent tries to guide their children toward good decisions. I said, there's a difference between guidance and control. She asked if I really thought my grandfather would be proud of me tearing apart the family. I said I thought my grandfather would understand why he'd structured his trust the way he did. My mother asked if there was any way to fix this, any way we could be a family again. I asked her if she was sorry for slapping me. She said she'd apologized for that already. I said no. She'd said she regretted it, which wasn't the same thing. She asked what the difference was. I said one acknowledges the action was wrong. The other just acknowledges it had negative consequences. She started crying again. Said she didn't know how to apologize in a way that would satisfy me. That she tried everything and I was still punishing them. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just refusing to be part of a family that treated me like a tool. She could call that punishment if she wanted, but from my perspective it was just boundaries. She asked if I'd ever forgive them. I said probably not. She said that was sad. I agreed. March 1st, the restructuring completed. The business was officially under my full control with new investors, new operational protocols, and a completely revamped management structure. My father's payout hit his account. He no longer had any role in the company. The business my grandfather started that my father built that I'd actually run for 5 years was now mine completely. I moved the headquarters to a new building in Brickell, hired new staff, brought in contractors who were loyal to me, not my father, started 3 new projects that had nothing to do with his old partnerships. I restructured everything from the ground up. It took 9 weeks, but I'd completely dismantled his empire and rebuilt it as mine. My father left a voicemail yesterday, just one. He said he'd been thinking about what I'd said. That maybe he had treated me too much like an employee and not enough like a son. That he'd been so focused on building something to leave us that he'd forgotten to actually raise us as people. He said he still thought I'd made wrong choices and destroyed things that didn't need to be destroyed. But he understood now why I did it. Not an apology. Still not an apology, but closer than he'd ever gotten. He said if I ever wanted to talk, he'd listen this time. He didn't expect me to call. He just wanted me to know. I deleted the voicemail. Today is March 2nd, 61 days since Christmas Eve. I'm in my new office on the 32nd floor looking out at Biscayne Bay. I own a business worth approximately $43 million. I have full control over every decision, every project, every dollar. I rebuilt everything in 9 weeks without them. My phone rings constantly, but it's business calls now. Contractors, investors, city officials, not my family. They've mostly stopped calling. My mother texts occasionally neutral things about the weather or asking if I'm eating enough. I respond sometimes, usually not. Miller sent me a friend request on Instagram 2 days ago. I haven't accepted it. My Aunt Violet calls every Sunday to give me updates I don't ask for. She says my parents are adjusting to their new reality, that my father started consulting for a smaller development firm, that my mother joined a book club with people who don't care about Miami society, that they're learning to live differently. She always asks if I'm happy. I tell her I'm satisfied. She says that's not the same thing. I say it's close enough. Someone in the comments on my first post asked what winning looked like. I think this is it. Not happiness, not reconciliation, not even revenge in the traditional sense. Just the absence of them from my life combined with complete control over what they thought was theirs. They treated me like I existed to serve them. Now I exist entirely separately from them. That's the win. I still think about standing on Brickell Avenue with champagne on my shoes. Still remember my mother laughing from 40 floors up. Still remember my father saying he had no son. Every time I sit in my office or sign papers or make decisions about the business, I remember those moments. They fuel every choice I make. People keep asking if I'll ever forgive them, if we'll ever reconcile. The answer is no. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because there's nothing to reconcile with. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry it had consequences. Those are not the same thing. My father spent 27 years building an empire on his father's money while treating his sons like assets. I spent 9 weeks dismantling that empire and rebuilding it as mine. He thought love didn't pay for penthouses. Turns out neither does his kind of family loyalty. I'm 27 years old. I own a $43 million business. I have no family to speak of. And I'm okay with that because the alternative was being their useful tool forever. This is better. Lonelier maybe, but better. To everyone who said I should forgive them and move on, I appreciate the advice, but that's not who I am. I'm the son who learned every lesson my father taught about business and applied them to the people who taught me. I'm the disappointment who thought he was better than his bloodline. And I was right. Feliz Navidad, Papa. The doors closed on your confused face 2 months ago, and they're staying closed.